What's going on, guys? It's NYPrepper here. In this video, I want to talk about what I think will happen to New York and much of the eastern seaboard after a collapse of society, after the apocalypse, SHTF, WROL, Tiatiawaki, whatever you want to call it. I want to share my thoughts on what will happen in New York, okay, because I am a New Yorker. I'm not too proud of that because what New York represents now is not something I'm proud of. But I am a New Yorker. I was born here and I live here now, so I live in New York, and I often wonder what would happen to my area after a collapse of society and what it would look like here after the apocalypse. So reason why I'm making this video is I actually had a dream a few nights ago, and the dream was very powerful, and I felt like I had to make a video on this topic to warn people, all right, especially my fellow preppers and Christians and patriots that live in New York and the East Coast. All right, we're not safe here, guys. It doesn't matter how big your survival group is. It doesn't matter how trained you think you are. It doesn't matter how much food you think you have. If you're living in the eastern seaboard or, New York State, you're not safe, okay? You have to relocate and get away from the big cities and get as far away from dense population areas. So, in my dream, I was coming back to New York. The dream started out with me coming back from some other part of the United States. I didn't know exactly where I was coming from. In my dream, my dream didn't tell me where I was coming from, what area of the US I was coming from, but I was coming from somewhere else. And the dream starts out with me driving through my old town, which is where I live right now, but after the collapse, in that dream, it was my old town because I must have had left this area and left, the eastern seaboard and went somewhere else. So it was my old town. So I was driving through the town where I live now, and I had like a rusty vehicle. I had a firearm on my person. I had a rifle and a pistol. And I had family members in the car with me, and we wanted to drive through the area here to see our old town and see where, we spent most of our life, and we wanted to see what happened to our town. So presumably, my dream is basically alluding to the fact that we must have bugged out or left New York before the collapse, and then we came back later on, a few years after the collapse of society, and we wanted to basically see what happened to the area and visit our old town, all right? But we couldn't do that because it was unsafe to do so during the apocalypse and during SHTF. So that's what the dream is alluding to. So the timeline of the dream is, it's not at the beginning of the apocalypse or at the end of the apocalypse. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. It's like it's in the deeper stages of the apocalypse after, years after whatever happened. So it's a couple of years after society collapsed. So we go back to New York to see our old town and see the area, and I'm driving through with my family. And we're driving through our town, and we're reminiscing on our old, hiking areas. We drove by our old church. We drove by our old house. We wanted to see if there were any supplies there. And we were driving through our neighborhood and around town, and we were looking to see if there were any survivors, if there was any other people there that were living there, and maybe some people that we used to know. Family, friends that lived in the area while society was still functioning normally. So we were looking for our family, our friends. We were driving around and trying to see if there was anybody we could find. And most of all, we just wanted to get some closure and drive out to our old town, our area where we lived for so long, and see, what happened to it after the collapse, So, and in the dream, when I'm driving through my town, everything was abandoned. There was no signs of people at all. Everything was totally abandoned. It was totally vacant. Houses were ransacked. Some businesses were burned down, but there was not a single person around. It was just like a total vacant post-apocalyptic wasteland. There was no people. There was nothing, okay? There was nobody around. And that's when my dream ended. So it was a very short dream. It was more like a daydream, I would say. I nodded off for about 15 minutes. It was more like a quick daydream, but that's how it ended. Nothing else after that. It just ended like that. We're driving through my town in New York after the apocalypse, a couple of years after. We're looking for, possibly friends and family that stayed around after the apocalypse or after SHTF. And we couldn't find anyone. Everything was empty. There was no signs of people around. Everything was just destroyed and ransacked. There were no resources left. And so I wanted to just make a video on this dream, and it kind of got me thinking what New York would be like after a collapse of society. And so it's presumed in my dream that I must have left right after SHTF, before the really bad stuff happened in New York, because I wasn't in my dream. I wasn't around for all the bad stuff that happened right after SHTF in New York State. So, I wanted to, that's why we came back here to see what happened, because we weren't here during SHTF. We weren't in New York during SHTF, so we wanted to come back and see what happened. So my thoughts about, what would happen to New York after SHTF and much of the eastern seaboard. I think what would happen is immediately after SHTF, if there's, let's say, a collapse of the dollar, a nuclear attack, World War III, foreign invasion, EMP, pandemic, whatever scenario you want to use, it's all pretty much the same thing. It doesn't matter what the cause of SHTF is. It's the results are the same. The results are panic. The results are unprepared people that are going to be doing crazy things to survive. Okay, and how do I know that? Well, I've actually talked to friends of mine. Okay, I actually have friends of mine who told me that they're going to go around and rob and steal, okay, at gunpoint after society collapses. And so you just don't know. You may think you know people, but you don't really know who somebody is, until the chips are down. And that's when you really see people's true colors coming out. That's when you see the wolves of society coming out and taking advantage of the situation, okay? And so what I think what would happen in New York is right after SHTF, everybody from New York City would flood upstate and to the surrounding areas, okay? Because people would eventually realize that there's no food in the city, there's no water, there's no sewage, there's nothing, okay? The city is not providing life for people there. I think initially in the city, people would be fighting for the first few weeks and the first few months. People would be fighting and trying to eke out a survival somehow. But eventually all those people in the city, millions and millions of them, there's 8 million people in New York City. And there's just no way that people could all survive in that tightly packed area if there's no resources, okay? There's no water, there's no food. There's not going to be any electricity, all right? How are people going to stay warm, all right? There's no way you can find firewood in New York City. What are you going to do, cut down trees in Central Park? So people are going to realize after a while that New York City is not safe to be in, and there's just no way you can survive there. So once people realize that there's no resources left in the city, and once people in the city realize that the power's not coming back, the grocery stores are empty, there's no water going to their faucet, they're going to panic. And when that happens, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to fight each other. They're going to try to take resources from their neighbors. They're going to be fighting. People in the city are going to be killing each other over cans of tuna and, bottles of water, okay? Because something as simple as water is a scarcity in an urban area. Same thing with food, okay? And there's nowhere to find water. There's nowhere to get food, okay? So people are going to fight each other first. And once they realize that fighting each other is not enough, that, yeah, they may be able to steal a can of tuna here or a can of tuna there, they're going to realize that in order to survive, they're going to have to go into upstate New York, okay, where I am, and other surrounding rural areas of, let's say, Pennsylvania or New England, where there's water, where there's other people that are still alive and thriving, okay? Because what's going to happen is people in the rural areas are going to be thriving after SHTF because they're going to get together with their communities, they're going to set up security, they're going to share food, they're going to grow food together, they're going to come together, and they're going to survive together. And in rural areas, you have a lot of advantages that you don't have in the city. You have land where you can grow things and you can raise livestock, you can hunt, you can fish, you can trap. You have all kinds of natural resources around you, firewood, all kinds of things, okay? And so people in rural areas are going to be thriving in this situation, all right? In upstate New York, where I am, people are going to come together, they're going to work together, and they're going to eke out some kind of survival together, okay? However, there's going to be this massive horde of unprepared people that are going to flood into upstate New York, and I think most of those people are going to go north into the Catskills and Hudson Valley area where I am, okay? And because that's the nearest rural area from New York City, it's just a straight shot north. And so you're going to have 20, 30 million people just flooding northward into upstate New York. And they're going to be like, it's going to be like a stampeding buffalo herd. They're just going to go through all the towns along the way, and they're going to rape and pillage their way through every single town when they make their way up northward, towards, wherever they want to go. But they're going to rape and pillage their way as they go north. And I think what's going to happen is, because New York State has such restrictive gun laws, unfortunately, a lot of people in upstate New York are disarmed. And there are a lot of gun owners in upstate New York, but it's not as much as it should be or could be. And the reason why is because of the liberal politicians in New York. They disarmed a lot of New York gun owners, okay? And so what's going to happen is you're going to have black market firearms circulating in New York City after SHTF. And so you're going to have groups of marauders coming through into upstate New York, and they're going to be better armed than the small town people in upstate, okay? Because the small town people are going to be stuck with 7-round magazines in the AR-15s, while the marauders are going to, they're going to get ammunition and rifles from other places through the black market. They're going to have AK-47s with 30-round clips and maybe even fully automatic weapons, but the law-abiding people that are trying to survive upstate are going to be stuck with 7-round magazines and in their AR-15s, okay? And so they're going to be at a disadvantage. And what I think is going to happen is, unfortunately, in this situation, the people in upstate New York are going to be steamrolled by the marauders and by this huge horde of people that are going to move northward into upstate New York. I hate to say that, but I feel that that's the reality, and that's what my dream was trying to tell me, because when I came back to New York in my dream, New York was vacant and there was nobody there. And the reason why nobody was there was everybody killed each other, all right? Because what happened was the horde of people from New York City that were unprepared, the 30 million people, they worked their way north, and they raped and pillaged their way, you know, through upstate. And maybe some of them didn't rape, but they definitely stole from other people to survive. So the people from the city, they stole everything. They moved their way north. They ransacked every town, every house. Everything was ransacked. And of course, there were firefights along the way, in my dream, you know, but that's what I think would happen. You know, you would have armed resistance in upstate New York. You would have groups of patriots with firearms trying to fight off this massive horde of people. Okay, but it's just way too much. You know, if you have, you know, you have 10 million people in New York City. Just in New York City alone, there's 10 million people. Long Island has another 3 or 4 million. Then you've got to think about New Jersey. Okay, New Jersey's another 10 million. So you're looking at 20 to 30 million people, all right, in the New York City area. And they're all going to go somewhere after SHTF hits. They're not going to stay in the city, okay? And we're already seeing this now. All right, we've already seen with the first wave of the virus how everybody started bugging out, okay? Up in my area, even now, you can't find any houses or any apartments at all because everything is being rented out. As soon as something comes on the market, it's rented or bought within days, okay? And the prices are insane. So people are bugging out of the cities as we speak. So this is kind of the beginning of that horde, okay? But this massive horde of people, they're going to ransack everything along the way, and there will be firefights, there will be resistance from people like myself, trying to protect themselves, protect their family, and protect their supplies. But it's just not going to be enough. You know, there's just not enough firepower in New York State, and there's not enough patriots in New York State to be able to hold off such a massive horde of unprepared city slickers. You know, 20, 30 million people. It's a lot of people to deal with, okay? And I don't care, you know, how big you may have a huge survival group. That's just a massive amount of people to deal with. So I personally think that New York State is going to be, people are going to kill each other, and what's going to end up happening is that horde is going to go northward, and you know, the Patriots, some Patriots may survive, but I think most of them will die, unfortunately, because they're just going to get overwhelmed, all right? There's just going to be way too many people to deal with, and I think that, you know, what's going to end up happening is New York is going to be a vacant wasteland after the collapse of society, all right? Because everybody's going to be dead, or everybody's going to have left already. It's going to be basically, in the beginning, it's going to be people panicking. Then you're going to have that massive horde. And then once that massive horde tries to escape the city, that's when it's going to be a war zone. Okay, so New York State, upstate New York, all the rural areas of the Northeast are going to be war zones. It's going to be literal war zones. I think that every night you're going to hear gunfire. All day and all night there's going to be gunfire for weeks on end. And at some point, I think after a couple of months, up to a year, the gunfire will slowly subside because people are going to run out of ammo, and people are going to be dead. And at that point, it's going to be a vacant wasteland, okay, after that whole mess, okay, after the horde goes through and the violence and stuff like that. So why am I sharing this video or sharing this dream and sharing these thoughts with you guys? I'm sharing these thoughts with you guys because if you live in New York State or in the eastern US and you're, you know, fairly close to any of the big cities, you really have to think about relocating and getting away from the big cities, okay? Ideally, you should be, you know, 200 miles from New York City, okay? I just think that 200 miles is the absolute minimum safe distance from New York City. But, you know, you really can't prep in New York State, unfortunately. I don't mean to have a negative outlook on it, but you can prep, but the outlook is very bad. I mean, even if you have all of your preps squared away and you have, you know, years and years of food stored up and lots of training very skilled person, plenty of firearms. It's just the odds are stacked against you because you have, 50 million people, right next door. And at any time, they could come flooding up to your area. So, New York is not a good place to be if you're a prepper, or anywhere along the eastern seaboard. You want to try to get away from any heavy population centers, any dense population areas, okay? And aside from that, you have extremely liberal policies that make it difficult to do things like store ammunition, buy different types of firearms, and in many places in New York, there's nowhere to even go shooting, okay? Some people have to drive 3-4 hours just to go shooting. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Let me know what you think. And as always, take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps. Prepare, practice, and persevere.